Hello, everybody. My name is Leanne Chuboff, and I'm the Vice President of Technical Affairs at SQF. Welcome to our session, Connecting the Dots from Hazard Analysis to Risk Assessment, featuring Geoff Farrell, the Global Senior Technical Manager at NSF. We appreciate you all joining us today. This session, actually, it says SQF Unites on the screen. It was a session that was canceled during our last in-person SQF Unites conference due to the Hurricane Nicole that blasted her way into Orlando, and we were forced to cancel our afternoon sessions. So many thanks to Geoff for bringing this back and giving us the opportunity to have that in there. And if you're when you're listening, if you were at SQF Unites, just put it in the chat. You were there. I would love to see who was there and who wasn't. So just feel free to chat that in. It's good to see a lot of people on the conference on this webinar today. So Geoff, you want to go to the next slide? Before we begin, SQF follows the FMI antitrust statement, and I did want to just share this with everybody. So please take a moment to look at the antitrust statement that's on the screen in front of you right now. Conversations regarding price fixing, boycotting, trade restrictions, or any other violations of antitrust law are to be avoided. If you believe that the conversation is headed that way, please speak up and we will do the same. So I'll just give you 3 more seconds to take a look at this antitrust statement and just keep that in mind. Food safety is typically a topic we don't have to worry about with antitrust because it is just not a competitive issue. So again, we appreciate the expertise of everybody on the line today, and especially our guest, Geoff. Yay, there were quite a few people at SQF Unites, Geoff. I don't know if you can see the chat, but it's really good to see that there was a lot of people that was there. So thanks again for doing this webinar. Okay, next slide. So it's my pleasure to introduce Geoff, our speaker. Geoff works as the Global Senior Technical Manager at NSF. NSF is our largest certification body at SQF. They hold the most certificates globally for SQF. So thank you very much for all your support. He has a lot of 25 years in food and beverage industry experience, but talking with Geoff, I would have to question that years, and actually his wealth of information is more than 25 years. So he was an GFSI auditor, so he can speak many of your languages that are out there, and he's going to present some really good information today about conducting a risk assessment. So Geoff, I am just going to give the floor to you, and you can start your presentation. So thanks. And just real quick, as Geoff goes through this, feel free to chat in your questions, and we're going to save them to the end. And Geoff will be available to answer them. So feel free to chat in your questions and we'll capture them and ask them to Geoff at the end. So Geoff, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Leanne. Thank you, everybody, for following me to this presentation here today. It is unfortunate we did not get to do this face-to-face, but we're kind of doing it face-to-face now. So let's jump in. So our agenda today, we're going to go through some learning objectives. We're going to take a quick peek at hazard analysis, and that's the starting point where we want to kind of dive into. We're going to define a hazard and a risk, and we're going to look at the two of those. We're going to give you the basics of a risk assessment, and we're going to talk on how that is applicable to or can be implemented in your SQF program. And then we've got an example at the end. So again, as we go, type your questions in. At the end of the presentation, I will answer as many questions as we can answer in the time allotted. So our learning objectives. So this is what our key takeaways are from today. This is what I want you to go away with is understand hazards, review the methodology of risk assessment, understand the difference between a risk and a hazard, apply the methodology of a risk assessment to the implementation of the SQF code. So take it back to your facilities, take it back to to where you're at and apply the methodology that we talked through today of the risk assessment and perform a risk assessment. So actually go and do it. So I challenge you to take these little tidbits away and use them and implement them in your systems at your facilities. So the beginning, the hazard analysis. So this is something HACCP or food safety plans are very mature now. They're very mature systems, but conducting a hazard analysis is nonetheless just as important today as it was 10, 20 years ago. With a hazard analysis, we are identifying and evaluating all of the hazards that present a risk to the food that you are producing, and it determines how you control these hazards. And that's really what it comes down to is, as an auditor, my number one job was to assess risk and ask questions around that risk of how are you controlling these risks? So that's really what it boils down to is, have you identified the risks and show me how you control those risks? So hazards are identified in product ingredients, incoming materials, processing steps, plant layout. So it's important that you take that holistic view of everything at your facility and you understand these are the hazards, these are the risks that are associated with it, and that your programs reflect control of those risks. So some of the things that we are still seeing today in auditing, some of the non-conformances that are coming out we're missing plant layout hazards, we're missing input hazards of water, air, those type of things. Make sure you have a holistic view that it is comprehensive. And I challenge you to go back and really kind of get a group together and dive into your hazard analysis. So what is a hazard and a risk? A hazard and a risk. So a hazard, by definition, is a factor that may lead to an undesirable effect, a substance present in food that has the ability or potential to cause an adverse health effect to the consumer. That's by definition, that's a hazard. A risk refers to the probability that this hazard will occur. Consideration of the likelihood of consumption and the nature of severity posed by the hazard. We're really going to take this apart as we go through. So this is really where risk assessment starts, but we have to understand what hazards are and what some of the hazards that we could potentially see in our systems at our facilities, and understand what those really are. So our types of hazards. So some of the hazards that we see in our facilities, and these, again, there's nothing new here. This is biological, chemical, physical, or a condition resulting from the process. So something comes out of the process or a practice or your equipment at the facility. So again, it goes back to that holistic view of looking at everything in your facility and identifying the hazards and the potential impact that they could have, the effect on consumers and ultimately the food industry, suppliers and producers. So again, making sure that you're aware of what some of the recalls are. If you have a recall in your industry from a hazard, you want to make sure that you're controlling that hazard, right? It definitely puts a potential impact on the entire food industry, any of the recalls. So it's important you understand hazards and impacts before you do your risk assessment. So this is really why I walked it back to the starting point of your hazard analysis and looking at what the types of hazards are. Now we're ready to jump into the risk assessment. So let's have a look and see what that is. So a risk assessment, it is a process of determining the level of action needed to prevent or eliminate an adverse food safety or quality event. It's a structured way for you to understand the risks associated with your process. So again, it's a structured way. It's a process to determine the level of action needed. So those are two big things right away, and we've only read the first two sentences. Does not have to be overly complicated or time consuming. And this is something that everybody needs to really understand is you need to make sure that you make it work for your facility. And we'll go through some examples further on, but it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but it has to work for your facility. You have to determine what your hazards are. and your hazards are different than another facility down the street. You have to make it specific for yours, and don't make it too overly complicated or time consuming, or you lose all of the value in doing a risk assessment. SQF is amazing at allowing for that flexibility of the risk assessment. It's written in the code, and you can use it throughout the code. So again, keep it simple. Define the scope, identify, assess your hazards, categorize your risks, and control your risks. It really truly boils down to the simpler you make it, the more effective it usually is. And this goes back to, if you keep it simple, more people will understand. If more people understand at your facility, you've got more eyes on everything that's going on in that facility, more eyes on the risks and how they're being controlled at your facility. So if you really truly make it simple, define what you're looking for, you identify, assess, and control, you're well on your way to a functioning food safety management system. So risk assessment from an SQF perspective. So let's really kind of dial it in here. You know, this was supposed to be SQF Unites, but it is a webcast for SQF. So let's dial it specifically into SQF. And by definition, it's a risk assessment is a specific requirement in the food safety codes where the SQF practitioner or delegated resources perform a structured approach to identifying, evaluating, and estimating levels of risk to hazards that might be present or reasonably likely to occur in the process. Now that's a lot of words there. That's a big definition. The key part there, and I'm going to actually change one of the words, you know, where it says the SQF practitioner or delegated resources, I'm going to change or to and. So the SQF practitioner and the delegated resources. So you want to grab a group, you want to put a group together. This can be a group approach, right? The SQF practitioner may not know everything, may not understand what all of the risks are. So you want to have that cross-functional team to help you look at this, to estimate the risks of the hazards that might be reasonably likely to occur in your facility. So it's best to have that expertise when you're doing this. And again, simpler, better. We're going to go through that as we go. But risk assessments are the backbone to any functioning food safety system. And this is vital. This is probably the biggest statement in this entire presentation is risk assessments are the backbone to any functioning food safety system. And that goes back to, if you make the risk assessment so convoluted that it doesn't work, then guess what? Your food safety management system probably won't function as well as it should. You know, that whole backbone to the food safety system, make sure you understand it, make sure it's clearly defined, make sure everybody involved knows what they're looking at when they're doing a risk assessment, and what the effects of doing this risk assessment could potentially be on the entire food safety system. And we're going to look at that a little bit deeper as we go, but this is one of those big takeaways. If you don't get anything else from this system, from this presentation, take away this sentence, write this down. Risk assessments are the backbone to any functioning food safety system. So where do we see it? We see it specifically in the SQF code in allergen management, jewelry, ice supply, detection of foreign objects, and all through approved suppliers. But again, I can't stress this enough, and Leanne will probably stress it as well. It is throughout the code. There is flexibility in the SQF code to do a risk assessment across the board. So imagine if you make it complex, convoluted, and you get it wrong, then it's throughout your entire food safety system, right? You lose that backbone, that strength of that backbone. So we want to make sure that we understand that SQF more than any gives us the flexibility to do a risk assessment and be responsible for what we're doing in the way of hazards and risks and understanding what those are. So let's jump in. Let's look at it. Let's look at the basics. So we're going to start right at the beginning. We're going to walk our way through, and then we'll get to the questions or the example at the end, and then we'll do the questions. So the beginning, risk assessment, a structured way to identify, rank, and take appropriate steps to address food safety and quality hazards. It is a process that has 2 steps in it. 1, severity and likelihood of a negative food safety and quality outcome. Now, those are 2 new words for us, severity and likelihood. We're going to dive into that to understand what those are. That's first. Second is the level of action needed to prevent or eliminate an adverse event. So we're looking at level of action. So what are we doing from that? So we're going to look at severity, we're going to look at likelihood, and then we're going to look at the actions associated with identifying those things. So now we're diving in. We're jumping into our food safety system. We're getting to the meat and potatoes of our basics for risk assessment. So severity versus likelihood. So severity is how bad is the outcome likely to be? How severe is it going to be? Likelihood, what are the chances of the outcome potentially happening? And you can do this in many different ways. So you see the 2 examples I put on the bottom. And this goes back to keeping it simple or making it work for your facility. So you can see the 2 examples here, they are significantly different. The one on the left has got severity and likelihood, and they've got a little risk score, risk category associated with it in colors. The one on the right is just got severity, likelihood, and then low, medium, high risk with the on the X and the Y axis here. So you see you can do it many different ways. So one of the things that I do want to throw out there is it has to work for your facility, it has to make sense for your facility. Copying and pasting it and dumping it into your program and saying, okay, there, look, it worked for this facility, so it must work for us. That's not necessarily the case. And we're gonna kind of break that apart and understand why in a few minutes here. But you can see there's many different ways, lots of colors associated with it. Red, critical, orange, high. We've got yellow, moderate, and then green is low. But you can see for severity in these two different charts here. So severity on the left-hand side, it goes from insignificant, minor, moderate, major to catastrophic. Whereas on the right-hand side, they're doing mild, moderate, and severe. If we look at likelihood, again, on the left-hand side, we've got 5 ratings. We've got rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain. And then on the right, we've got remote, possible, and highly likely. So as someone just kind of taking a peek at this and looking at it going, man, I don't know what mild, moderate, and severe mean, or what catastrophic is and how that's different from a major, or insignificant from a minor. So that's the first question that kind of pops out, or should pop out to you when you're looking at a risk assessment. It can be very, very scary to look at one of these and go, man, I have to put one of these into my food safety system. I don't necessarily understand exactly what these are going to tell me or what we're going to do. So let's start with the definitions. So we want to clearly define what our risk matrix is telling us. So if we go back and we look at the severity criteria, and I did it for the one on the right-hand side here. So our severity criteria are mild, moderate, and severe. So what does mild mean? What exactly does mild mean? So mild, by definition, and this is what you want to do with your group, you want to define it before you go and put any numbers or put anything to it. So we're going to sit down as a group, we're going to say mild, failure of whatever the risk is we're looking at is unlikely to pose an immediate risk to the consumer. That's what we would consider to be mild. Moderate, so now we're moving across this, we're moving to the right here on the moderate in the severity. Moderate is a failure of, again, whatever the risk we're looking at is unlikely to pose an immediate risk to the consumer, but repeated failure may be a potential risk. And then the last one, failure of whatever it is likely to lead to an immediate health impact. So now we know exactly what mild, medium, moderate, and severe mean. We're going to go and we're going to look at likelihood now. So we're going to educate our group. Again, we're keeping it simple, right? we're making it very clear. We're writing it out. We're giving them these definitions here. So likelihood, failure is unlikely to happen or rare. Failure can happen, but not too frequently. And then failure is likely to happen and often frequently. So now we've got our entire chart kind of spelled out for us. We know exactly what we're doing as a group. If we're looking at a risk, we're putting it into a risk assessment. Now we've got our clear definitions of what remote, possible, highly likely mean, what mild, moderate, and severe mean. Now we're ready to jump into the outcomes. And that's what we're clearly defining next. So now we want to define exactly what low, medium, and high, or critical, or any of those. This is our outcome to the statement, to what we're looking at. This is really where we want to get to. So some examples: cleaning frequencies. So the risk assessment can be, can we reduce the cleaning frequency of whatever it is? That would be your X. If it comes out low cleaning frequency, we can move it to monthly. Medium, we can move the frequency to weekly, or high, it stays at daily. And this could be, we want to move it from a current state to another state. We want to move it from daily to monthly, or an audit frequency within your facility. This is not a GFSI thing. You can't go, you know what, we want it every 2 years or 3 years. That's not something we can do. But within your facility, when you're talking GMP audits, your other audits that you have in your facility, look at to see if your audit frequencies are correct, or sanitation audits, something like that. Put it through the risk assessment as well, and then you've got your assessment. You looked at it. You've taken that really kind of structured look at, is it okay, or is it viable for us to do this, to make this change, to add this into our food safety management system. As we're doing this, though, you need to make sure that you've got kind of that 10,000 foot view as well. So if we make this change, if this risk assessment says, you know what, it's low, we're going to move it to a different frequency, what is the potential for product contamination? How is the product protected now that we've done this? How likely are we to ship contaminated product? And is there a visible measure to identify contaminated product within our system? How effective are the controls we currently have in place? And does that change by this risk assessment? So again, we're doing the risk assessment. We get the group together. We've kind of put it through there. Now we're looking to why? What is the reason for changing, reducing this policy or procedure? Is there a chance for food safety to be compromised? And will the exclusion, so if we're excluding something, have any effect on any other part of the food safety program? So again, this is why it's important to have a group, to have that cross-functional group that has all of the expertise, so that doing a risk assessment maintains, and doing it correctly strengthens your system, that you're not just doing a risk assessment to do something quicker, to do it faster, to save money, to all of these things, right? We want to make sure it has a purpose that is clearly defined, and that the effects of doing it after you've kind of run it through, that you're looking at that from a holistic food safety management plan or management system view as well. So how do we start on severity? What would happen if? That's a great question. What would happen if contaminated food product is ingested? Have we considered all of the vulnerable groups as well? Allergies, children, small children. Is it likely to cause harm or death? That's how we look at severity. It's always what would happen if. And those are some of the great questions to start with severity. Again, on likelihood, how likely is it to occur? What is the ease at which this can happen intentionally? So making sure that you're looking internally as well. Can this happen intentionally within our system? Had there been recalls causing adverse effects? any history with the facility or within any of the suppliers as well. So some of the questions asked to get the group kind of moving forward on the right path with likelihood as well. So that gives you your, and again, this is really only an introduction into risk assessment, but it really walks you through that kind of, okay, this is what we're going to do with risk assessment. We're going to put some structure around it. We're going to define what our severity and likelihood is. Now we're going to put it through, and then we're going to look at our entire system to see if this is viable. And if it is, you've got all of this information. This is your investigation that you would present to an auditor. So when asked that question, you know, how are you mitigating this risk, or what is the risk associated with this, and why aren't you doing this? Well, I have a risk assessment here, and this is the group we got together. This is how we define severity. This is how we defined our likelihood, and it came out as a low. And this is the reason why it doesn't affect our entire food safety management system. That's a complete review of you know, assessing risk and strengthening that backbone of your food safety management system. So let's jump into our risk assessment examples. I say examples, but I think there's only one. But let's find out. We'll find out together. So allergens. And this is something, you know what, we've got these two here. We're looking at it. Do we really need to do a wet allergen changeover? We can save so much time and money by not doing one. Now, anytime we see that word allergen, it almost escalates it automatically, but we'll walk through this. I picked a fairly easy one for us to walk through. We are changing from one allergen to another. So do we need allergen changeover between products? So our scope is, do we need to do a wet changeover or wet clean between allergen runs? That's what we're looking at here. So what are the risks associated with that? So again, in our group, we will look at what are the risks? Well, there's cross-contamination risks, there's potential recall, illnesses, product buildup, spills. So we're getting all of this information together. We're looking at all of this information. Has there been recalls in other industries? So now our group is just in the information gathering part of our program here. We understand what our scope is. Now we're going to dive into our records internally to see if we have control of this, so that we can at least proceed to a risk assessment. So we're going to look at our GMP audits, our MSS, our internal audits, our complaints. Have we got complaints before? And have we had a recall in allergens, or a recall for these allergens? So these are just some of the records that you would want to kind of gather up, have a look at, so you've got all of the information at your hands, so that the entire group is educated in, hey, you know what, we can do a wet clean. We need to do a wet clean, or we don't need to do a wet clean. So now we're going to go with our outcomes and decisions, right? We looked at the severity and your likelihood. We're going to look at what's our outcomes and decisions here. So, you know, define if we have a mild, moderate, and severe, if we defined it like we did earlier, outcomes and decisions. So now we're talking allergens. So low risk, no allergen clean needed. So, and that would be in the severe, would be moderate and unlikely, or mild and unlikely, or mild and possible. That would be those would be your low risk items. So if we did it and we went, you know what, it's mild and unlikely, then the decision tree or the outcome that we've defined is no, we don't need an allergen clean at this point. If we look at medium risk, so then we're kind of grading up here. So severe and unlikely is a medium risk. So we'll have to do a visual check of the line, or remove excess product buildup. Or if it's moderate and possible, or if it's mild and likely. So then, you know, that puts us into that medium risk category. And we're just kind of following it over, go over to moderate and then up to possible, we get to medium risk. high risk. So it is just that, it is high risk. And there are lots of things associated with high risk. So high risk, our outcome is we will do a complete allergen wet clean. And high risk is severe and possible, severe and likely, and moderate and likely as well. So that's what we've identified within our system. And it could be different for your facility. So we saw the charts earlier. We saw how different they are. The chart needs to be appropriate for your facility. You determine what this chart is. I don't tell you what this chart is. I don't send this along, but this chart has to make sense. It has to line up with your outcomes and decisions. It has to line up with how you're defining your severity and your likelihood. So for this one, we have identified it as likely and severe. So it comes out as a high risk. So we need an allergen clean required between allergen runs. So again, this is just a quick example. It's going to take you a lot longer to go through it. You need to identify are your allergens ones that potentially can cause severe illness. Dive into it, understand what your system is, and then follow the outcome. Follow what the outcome is. So in this case, we are not saving time or money. We are doing a complete allergen clean after every single allergen run. And that's a very quick introduction to a risk assessment in a practical application at the end. But what are some of the common frequently asked questions for risk assessment? So we get those questions of, well, what can we do a risk assessment on? What exactly is risk assessment used for? What are some of the common ones? So some of the common ones are, how do I determine the proximity of an insect light with glue boards and is not an electrocution device type to finished product? How close do we put that to finished product? How do I deal with piercings that cannot be removed? Can pull ties be used in production areas? Does pallet racking need to be 18 inches from the wall? And Leanne's going to kill me, but the 18 inches, that's not an actual number. That's not a requirement in any way. But you can take that, you can remove that out and say, does the pallet racking need to be away from the wall, away from the outside wall? Are stick pins allowed on a desk in the seam room as a filler? Do hair restraints necessarily mean hair nets? And for everybody's facility, for every different facility out there, for whatever your industry is, this can mean a different thing for a different industry. And it's dependent on your product that you're producing. It's dependent on the risks associated with your product and your industry. And this is why you need to take it and make it your own. And I can't stress that. I can't stress that enough to truly take it and make it your own within your system. So that was it. That was all that I had for my presentation. Just a quick run through risk assessment, how it relates to SQF. A 10,000-foot view of that. So
Excellent. Well, thank you, Geoff. That was a lot of good information. We do have some questions in, but feel free to chat them if you all have any questions, and maybe you have more as we're going to go through the Q&A that we have right now. So the first question that we have is, what is the difference between a risk analysis and a risk assessment?
A risk analysis and a risk assessment?
Yeah, those two words seem to be used interchangeably. Like sometimes we say risk analysis and sometimes we say a risk assessment. Is it like just a verb versus a noun, or like?
I would associate the two the same. If you're doing a risk analysis and a risk assessment, the two can be interchangeable. The process to get to the end, I think, is the important part. Analysis, assessment, the key is looking at that first word, that risk word. And that's really
Yeah.
where your focus needs to be on in the risk analysis, risk assessment. But that's a good first question.
Yeah. A stumper. You stumped him already. Yes.
You stumped me on
It's
the first
more,
one.
maybe it's about looking and analyzing and identifying and then looking at the assessment, which is then, action or and assessing. Like I said, maybe more a noun versus a verb, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you're assessing and analyzing within this process. And that's kind of that critical part of getting your team together to really assess number one, what the risk is, and analyze how that is a part of your system there. So I think,
Yeah.
now that we dove a little bit deeper into it, the two kind of marry up quite nicely.
Yes. Yeah. So speaking of the team, you talked about having a risk assessment team. Is there somebody, let's say besides the SQF practitioner, but somebody like a hidden gem that you think should be on that risk assessment team? So is there somebody like maintenance or, the intent behind it, but who would be that? Don't forget to think outside the box and include that person, kind of a thing.
Yeah, so your team should be cross-functional. I do think there's a lot of gems out there, and your sanitation, your maintenance, all of those people are important, but the operators, the ones that are actually doing whatever operation it is on the line, they're the true superstars in this risk assessment. And it does not take a lot of time to go and ask them the question of, hey, you know what, we're looking at changing this. What do you think? What are your thoughts? What are some of the potential repercussions to do this? And you will be absolutely amazed at some of the responses. They're to me, they're some of the smartest people in the entire facility, and that's no offense to anybody else. But my industry experience, it's mind-boggling. And they're invaluable in this whole assessment and risks and all of that.
Yeah, no, that's a good pro tip there. Don't forget to include the team in anything in your food safety system, like you said. Another question is, when assessing risk using likelihood versus severity, do you need to consider the existing control measures? It could result in a reduced severity rate if you consider those. So
yeah, absolutely. So, and this is why we do a risk assessment. This is absolutely it. Is if you've got the frequency wrong and you want to change it, well, show me and tell me, right? It's that tell and show through the risk assessment that, you know what, this frequency was too much. Now we've reduced it here, and these are the measures, and this is what we looked at. Yeah, absolutely. This is the power of what this tool can do is, you're moving away from the, you know what, it's taken us too long to do this, so we're going to do it in half the time. Well,
yeah.
Why? And how does that affect your food safety management system? The risk assessment kind of clearly defines that for you as you kind of work through it.
So would you recommend that all risk assessments then be documented?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do both. If it's not documented, how do I know? Right? I mean, that's always one of those questions. But using that kind of thought process of, okay, you know what? If we change this frequency, that's the starting point, right? You don't have to document kind of throwing these ideas out there, but using that thought process, using that risk assessment mentality, that's your starting point. And at the end of it, yes, we want it documented, absolutely, because as an auditor, if you line up 10 people and tell me, yeah, you know what, we did a risk, and all 10 of them say it, guess what? It's still not done. I don't have anything to show that this is the case in your facility. And bottom line is, it's your facility. It's the risk that you're controlling.
Yeah, and I also, just to add on to that, I think it's a historical document to demonstrate why you're doing what you're doing, even to revisit that risk assessment if something was to change, processing, incoming ingredient, whatever was in that assessment, the whole analysis.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm not quite sure if you could answer this, but somebody, Sheena, actually, I'm a sanitation team leader at a ramen manufacturing plant. So dry noodles, what would be the biggest risk associated with instant noodle product? I have my thoughts. You tell me your thoughts. I have my thoughts right off the bat.
Oh, no, you know what? I don't know what the biggest risk would be.
Yeah. I mean, if
Um,
you look it out in the hazard categories, biological, physical, chemical, right? I would think
Yeah.
physical, but
Yeah, your physical would definitely be one of them for ramen. But and I think this is a perfect question of make sure you've got the right people in the room to do the risk assessment, right?
yeah,
To understand what those risks are, because I mean, you throw it out to a general group and you can get a general answer back, and then take that back to your facility. It might not fit. It might not fit your facility, and you're the expert, right? It's
right,
your plant. You're the expert. You tell me what those risks are, and then show me how you're controlling those
right.
risks.
And like you said, using some of that historical, whether it's complaints or
Yeah.
any even industry news related. So I think using all that information and taking it and doing that risk assessment with including, that's why it's so important to have the great team members in the room with you there.
Yeah, and I think the
Oh,
recalls
go ahead.
is a big one. So looking
Yeah.
at
Oh,
recalls
recalls. Yeah,
and bringing that
absolutely.
back to your facility and saying, they had a recall for this in their facility. Is that a risk to my facility? And really looking at it from a proactive spot, when, the last thing you want to do is be reactive. Oh, we had a recall for the same thing that Joe had 2 months ago, and shame on us, we didn't look at it, right? So
Mhm.
I think that's vital as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, when I think I told you this story, when we were at SQF Unites, I was in a white blouse and there was these red hors d'oeuvres. And I did a risk assessment in my head. I did the likelihood and severity of this red hors d'oeuvre landing on my white blouse. And I chose not to eat the red hors d'oeuvre because I felt like both were very in the high category and I just wasn't going to take that chance. So I have that risk mindset simply because I work around it all the time at SQF, and same for you at NSF. But how do we get employees to kind of have that same risk mindset? What would be some tips that you think, how can sites engage to get their employees to get that risk mindset?
I think this is a great question. I think it starts with explaining risk and showing risk to them. So that, somebody operating a machine, this is what the risk is. This is what the risk is to our product, and really kind of defining what risk is. And then taking that and kind of working that through in your conversations. Okay, what would happen if? And it goes back to those, what would happen if? So now they understand what risk is, and you're doing the what would happen if. Now they've got that start that hamster rolling at this point, and it's really powerful at that point. It doesn't have to be in a training class. In fact, you know what, this this can be your plant manager going and having a general conversation with somebody on the line, or a QA stopping to talk to an auditor, kind of not in any formal matter, in an informal matter. And that drives number one, food safety culture. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but that's a big one, right? It drives food safety culture, and it also engages your employees, so they're included in the process. And you know what? The next time you get a group together, you include them, they're getting better at this risk assessment process, and
Yes.
that's how I believe it happens, is that way.
Yeah, just reminding them every day. Okay, another question. when considering pathogens in dry food products that do not contain kill steps, is there always a possibility of contamination? Severity seems to be subjective in this analysis. Do you have any recommendations, best practices for determining severity in these scenarios?
This is another great question. It goes back to you clearly defining what those are. Subjectivity comes when you make things very generic, and what would happen if, or that goes back to, has it happened in the past? Number one, that helps with determining severity, and getting the group together to understand, hey, you know what, this is what our risks are at this facility. We're a dry facility. These things have happened in the past. These are all the recalls for this. What does the group think based on these definitions that we've outlined in our 3 or 4 or 5 different categories of severity, but being crystal clear on what each of these defines, what the definition of each of those: mild, moderate, severe, however you do it, that's really where it starts.
Yeah. So everything that you said, the documentation, understanding how to build the likelihood and severity, what kind of advice would you have on how you would present that to management? Because if management is still considering cost savings or production runs or something ahead of that, how do you get them on board to take this risk assessment seriously?
Well, if you've implemented SQF correctly and you have a food safety culture in place, this should really not be a big issue. But it's about educating, and it starts with with identifying the risks and what is associated with those risks. So it's that part of your risk assessment where you're saying, you know what, this is a high risk for us to do allergen changeovers in our facility, and the potential is that we kill someone, that somebody could die or someone could get seriously injured. And here's the examples of it actually happening where people have been seriously injured or have died in an instance like this. So that's where the conversation starts, is educating around, this is why we did this. This is why we're looking at this. And, auditing is a big part of answering that question, why. As an auditor, run the roads for 10 years, my job was to assess risk. And it was, this does not meet the code, and this is why it doesn't meet the code. So I think that it really starts with that why discussion with your senior management.
Yeah, what I've also done in the past, in my previous manufacturing experience, as well as what I've done in industry, is relating it and speaking the language of management. So perhaps putting a number into any type of a recall. So, I've heard people say anytime there's a recall, or you're actually doubling the amount of money it takes to make this product. So if we do it this way, we have a 50% likelihood of a recall occurring, and that's going to double the amount this product costs right now. So putting it in quantifiable terms to senior management sometimes then sparks their attention, and then you can go into that other detail as well. So maybe grab their attention with speaking about the costs of the potential cost if this did occur. So that's another tip
that's a great one
as well. I don't know the answer to this question, Geoff, maybe you do. Is there any anticipation of HACCP transitioning to risk assessment more in line with pharma or medical devices, where there are additional columns that show the new risk after mitigation strategies are in place?
Wow. These are fantastic questions.
I know, we got PhDs on the line here.
Yeah. I like the idea of that. I think there's
Mhm.
value in that. I honestly, it's you know, that spells it out a little bit more. Like you've taken it
Yeah.
a little bit further. This is how we're mitigating it, bringing it down, and this is what we consider it afterwards. You know, that's kind of the follow through on it. But I don't
Yeah, I
know
was
if
gonna call that a pro tip and not just a
yeah,
question, but that's a
that's
kind of a
totally
pro tip to add that,
that's
yes.
totally a pro tip for sure. Yeah, that person gets a gold star for sure.
I know, right? That's a great idea.
Yeah,
And I
whatever
think
that
it
was. Thank
also,
you.
yeah, I think that's another demonstration to senior management. If you can say, here's the risk before we put in these mitigation strategies, here's the risk after we put in these mitigation strategies, what do you want to gamble on? Do you want to go on this one or do you want to go on that one? So I think that's just a really good pro
It
tip
is.
right there. Mhm.
I like what you
Yeah.
did. You kind of put that back. Wow. I don't know, because if you look at some of the recalls and the teams that were put together, or you know, in the industries that I've worked, I've had teams of up to 8 or 10, and I've had teams of 4 or 5. But if you look at the Dole recall from the SQF Unites, they had massive teams, brought loads and loads of people together to determine, you know, what the root cause was here. And you know, the more the merrier, but again, you have to, that comes with a little asterisk beside, you have to manage and direct your people. They have to have a purpose there. And you know, you need someone to lead this group. If you can't lead a group of 20 or 25, then make it a 10 or
Right.
15.
I think it's the quality versus quantity
Yes.
as well. So getting the key players involved versus quantity. So another question about receiving the slide deck, and everybody will get. So Geoff has graciously is going to share the information that he's presenting to you. So we have a couple more minutes for a couple more questions, if you don't mind, Geoff. I
Yeah.
actually have one for you. I have one for you. Um,
All right.
so risk assessments are in the SQF code. You talked about all the different aspects of a risk assessment, whether it's identifying the different types of clothing you're going to use, or you know, any of those other examples that you provided. So and I want to rephrase what you said is risk assessments are the backbone of any food safety system. So you say that, and I completely agree, but is in addition 9. So I guess my question is, if when we do a different edition, which isn't coming anytime soon, so nobody freak out, there isn't going to be a new edition anytime soon. But if you were to rewrite edition 9, what would you change anything? Would you add anything? Is there anything you would want to tweak as it relates to having risk assessments?
So I think that there should be more risk assessment in there, and it goes back to the flexibility within the system and the customization that's needed to put the SQF programs into facilities. Right? It's not just 2.1.1. Okay, here we go. 2.1.1. It's having that flexibility to understand the intent of the code and use a tool like a risk assessment to really drive that intent into your food safety management system. And I think that's something that we're moving in the right direction. I think from 8 to 9, the direction is a solid direction. I mean, I live and breathe SQF. I think for 10, if we had more risk assessment or more ability to interpret that code, customize that intent of the code into our system, and use risk assessment as the tool, that's huge value.
Yeah, I agree. So do you think I know that we take this even into the quality code. how to do, it's more of a threat assessment. What are your quality threats into the site? Is that, you know, so taking it into even in the quality code, I think we could have this risk mindset throughout all of SQF. I agree.
I think so too. And I think that the value is in the intent of the code. Getting away from, oh, these two words are here, risk assessment. So I have to do this. It has to say risk assessment. It doesn't. You have to show me how you're assessing the risk of whatever it is you're assessing the risk of, right? And that's kind of a loss.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but somebody just chimed in and said they already have suggestions for version 10. So thank you very much. Risk assessments to be documented and reviewed annually for key topics like allergens, fraud, cleaning, food defense. But somebody just asked this question, and this will be our last question, is what are the most overlooked risk assessments that are not required by SQF?
Oh, wow.
I know.
Wow. Most overlooked risk assessments. Wow, I'm drawing a blank here because you've got.
It's more about from the questions that we get, the questions that we get about, like that one example that Geoff put in there regarding, can I keep push pins in my drawer in my room? You know, can I have a glass coffee pot in the production office? Can I have those things that, you know, you can't have glass? What is the risk of doing that? And I think to me, those are some of the overlooked ones because it explains why you shouldn't have these things in there. So and I think this is in the code, but I think uniforms are also very overlooked, which is why it's in the code. But uniforms, we get that question a lot. Like, why can't I have buttons on my smocks? Can I have, you know, a pocket in my frock? You know, so we got those questions a lot.
Yeah. Wow.
I don't know if that sparked anything from you, but yeah.
Great. And drinking on the floor can, you know, we're an operation that has extreme heat. So can we drink on the floor, or you know, stuff like that? Those are some of the other overlooked ones that we do get a lot of questions on that. Or if I shut the door in my garage, can I produce a product and sell it to Costco? Right. So risk assessment can go right across the board, and be used for anything. But you know, a lot of them, it's like Leanne said, you have to kind of take what you're looking at and then run it through that risk assessment, and hopefully you get to the right spot. You've done it, you've defined it, you've clearly defined it, and then the backbone to your food safety management system just gets stronger and stronger.
Yeah. All righty. Well, thank you, Geoff. I really appreciate your time today. So if you can go to the next slide, I just wanted to do one last closing. Is Geoff is putting together or put forth this risk assessment guide that's available for you on NSF's website. So if you go to this website, you'll be able to download for free this risk assessment guide. And it is a very handy tool for you all. So take note of that website. I don't know if Geoff, you can put it in the chat so people can just click on it. That would be helpful.
Okay. I'll try to do that after we're done.
I think I can do it actually. Okay. But as you do that, what I also want to promote is our risk courses and our free guidance documents on risk assessments. So we have that available on our website. We have some new online training. It's entirely risk-based. So all about allergen management, food fraud, food defense, conducting a risk assessment, using data to conduct a risk assessment. So there's a lot of great information in this risk bundle course that we have put together this year for our new online training. And we also, if you go to our website, sqfi.com, under resources, our guidance document on how to conduct a risk assessment is available free for downloading as well. Just click on those QR codes and that'll take you there. The last thing is, this is actually starting off our SQF 365 event. So this is our event for 2023. It's a combination of virtual and in-person gatherings. And so Geoff, again, this is trailed from our hurricane enabled event, but this is really part of our 365 event. So in the chat, we actually posted the link to our future 365 events. We have another one scheduled for March 6th, which is not your top non-conformances, but should they be. So this is another all-star panel that we will have, led by Tammy Van Buren, our compliance manager, and a bunch of other certification bodies to join them, to give their perspective about the top non-conformances that really aren't the top non-conformances, but we really think they should be the top non-conformances. So hopefully you could join us on March 6th as well. And so with that, look at the websites that were provided in the chat for you. And we thank you all for your time today. We appreciate your support for SQF, and we look forward to seeing you on future events. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.